The desert planet Zarian Prime looked like a giant ball of orange sand from space. Jake Martinez pressed his face against the small window of the transport ship and watched the planet grow larger. The swirling dust storms on its surface looked like angry clouds that never stopped moving. "First time seeing Zarian Prime?" asked Dr. Lisa Park, sitting across from him. She was a scientist who studied alien life forms. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the standard blue uniform of the Terran Exploration Corps. "Yeah," Jake said. "Looks hot." Lieutenant Ben Cole laughed from his seat nearby. "Hot doesn't even begin to describe it. The surface temperature can hit 50 degrees during the day and drop to freezing at night. And that's on a good day." Jake nodded. He was the commander of this small diplomatic team. His job was to make friends with the aliens who lived on this desert world. The humans had only been part of the galactic community for 20 years, and they still needed to prove themselves to other species. The ship landed at Kaltari City, the only major settlement on the planet. As soon as the airlock opened, Jake felt the dry heat hit his face like opening an oven door. The air tasted like dust and metal. The Kaltari people looked like tall, thin lizards that walked on two legs. Their skin was dark brown and covered in small scales that helped protect them from the harsh sun. Elder Zarthul met them at the landing pad. He was very old, even for a Kaltari, and his scales had turned almost black with age. "Welcome to Zarian Prime," Zarthul said in perfect English. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "You come at an interesting time. The Sandstorm trial begins in 2 days." Jake had heard about the trial during his briefings. It was famous throughout the galaxy. Every few years, the Kaltari held this ancient test, where beings from different worlds tried to survive in their desert during the worst storm season. "How many are participating this year?" Lisa asked. "3 brave souls," Zarthul replied. "Come, I will show you." They walked through the city, which was built into the side of a large rock formation to protect it from sandstorms. The buildings looked like they had been carved directly from the stone. Kaltari citizens moved slowly through the streets, conserving their energy in the heat. The training grounds were located outside the city walls. Here Jake saw the 3 contestants preparing for the trial. Each one represented a different alien species, and each looked incredibly dangerous. The first was Vextar, a warrior from the Zentorian Empire. He stood nearly 8 feet tall and was covered in natural armor plates that looked like black metal. His forearms ended in clawed hands that could probably crush stone. Vextar was practicing combat moves, his massive body moving with surprising speed. "The Zentorians evolved on a world with constant warfare," Zarthul explained. "Their armor can stop energy weapons, and they can survive for weeks without food or water." The second contestant was Kilnara, a Mindari from the telepathic worlds. She looked almost human, except for the silver markings that covered her pale skin and the fact that her eyes glowed with a soft blue light. She sat perfectly still in meditation, not moving at all. "The Mindari can read thoughts and predict the future," Zarthul said. Kilnara has already seen several possible outcomes of the trial in her mind. The third contestant was the most unusual. Theron was a Nexus android, a robot that had gained consciousness. His body was made of silver metal and crystal, with glowing circuits visible under his transparent skin. Sensors and tools extended from various parts of his body as he tested the environment. "Theron has survived in the vacuum of space," Zarthul noted. "His mechanical body does not need air, food, or water. He can process any type of energy as fuel." Jake watched the 3 contestants and felt very small. Each one had advantages that seemed impossible for a human to match. Natural armor, psychic powers, and a body that didn't need basic life support. "Tell me about the trial," Jake said. Zarthul's eyes grew serious. "The contestants are taken to random locations in the Great Desert. They must survive alone for 7 days during the Crimson Storm season. These storms can last for days without stopping. The winds reach speeds that can throw a grown Kaltari through the air. The sand cuts like tiny knives. The temperature changes so fast it can kill." "What equipment do they get?" Ben asked. "Very little. A basic shelter pod, enough water for 3 days, and emergency food for 2 days. After that, they must find their own way to survive." Lisa looked worried. "How many beings have passed this trial?" "In 3,000 years, only 47 have succeeded. Most species consider it impossible. That is why passing the trial brings such honor." They spent the rest of the day learning about Kaltari culture and watching the contestants train. Jake noticed that each alien seemed confident about their chances. Vextar boasted loudly about Zentorian strength. Kilnara spoke quietly about seeing victory in her visions. Theron calculated his success probability at 73%. That evening, they attended a feast in honor of the trial. The Kaltari served food that tasted like spiced sand, but Jake ate it politely. During the meal, Vextar approached their table. "So these are the humans," the Zentorian warrior said, looking down at Jake with all four eyes. "I have heard about your species. You come from a soft world with gentle weather and easy living." "Earth has its challenges," Jake replied calmly. Vextar laughed, a sound like metal grinding. "Challenges? Your world has seasons that change slowly and storms that last only hours. You have never known real hardship. No human could survive the Sandstorm trial." "Maybe not," Jake said. "We're just here to observe and learn." "Wise," Vextar said. "It would be embarrassing for your species to fail so publicly." After the warrior left, Lisa leaned over to Jake. "Don't let him get to you. He's just trying to intimidate everyone." But Jake was thinking. He looked around at the other contestants, each so confident in their special abilities. Then he thought about humanity's place in the galaxy. 20 years since first contact, and they were still seen as the weak newcomers from an easy world. "Jake," Ben said quietly, "I know that look. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Jake said slowly, "that maybe it's time someone showed these aliens what humans can really do." Elder Zarthul appeared beside their table. "Commander Martinez, is everything well?" Jake stood up and looked around the feast hall. All conversation slowly stopped as aliens turned to look at him. "Elder Zarthul," Jake said in a clear voice, "I would like to enter the Sandstorm trial." The hall went completely silent. Lisa's fork clattered to her plate. Ben's mouth fell open. Even the confident contestants looked shocked. "Jake, no," Lisa whispered. But it was too late. The words were spoken, and every alien in the room had heard them. The silence in the feast hall lasted for what felt like forever. Jake could hear his own heartbeat as hundreds of alien eyes stared at him. He had just volunteered for something that killed most people who tried it. Elder Zarthul was the first to speak. "Commander Martinez, do you understand what you have just requested? The Sandstorm trial is not a game or a diplomatic gesture. It is a test that has claimed many lives." "I understand," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But I think it's time humanity proved itself." Vextar burst into laughter. "This is perfect. The soft human wants to play with the real warriors. Tell me, little human, can your weak body survive without air conditioning and comfortable beds?" Jake felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his face calm. "I guess we'll find out." "Jake, please think about this," Lisa said, grabbing his arm. "You're not trained for survival in extreme conditions. You're a diplomat, not a desert warrior." Ben nodded. "She's right. This isn't about proving anything. It's about staying alive." But Elder Zarthul raised a clawed hand for silence. "The human has made his request in front of witnesses. According to our ancient laws, I cannot refuse unless he withdraws the request himself." Jake looked at his friends' worried faces, then at the smug expression on Vextar's face. "I'm not withdrawing anything." Kilnara, the telepathic contestant, spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft and musical. "I have looked into the possible futures, Commander Martinez. In most of them, you do not survive the first day." "Most isn't all," Jake replied. Theron's mechanical voice added, "My calculations show your survival probability at 11.7%. This seems unwise." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Jake said. Elder Zarthul studied Jake for a long moment. "Very well. Tomorrow you will undergo the ritual preparation. The trial begins at dawn the following day. But know this, human. Once you enter the desert, there is no rescue. You succeed or you die." The feast continued, but the mood had changed completely. Aliens whispered among themselves about the crazy human who thought he could survive what had killed thousands of others. Jake tried to eat, but the food tasted like ash in his mouth. Later that night, Lisa and Ben cornered him in his quarters. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Lisa demanded. "You just signed your own death warrant." "Look, I know it sounds crazy," Jake said, "but think about it. Humanity has been part of the galactic community for 20 years, and we're still seen as the weak species from the easy world. Maybe it's time to change that." Ben shook his head. "Jake, there are better ways to prove humanity's worth than dying in a desert." "Are there?" "Look at those contestants. Each one has some incredible advantage. Natural armor, psychic powers, a body that doesn't need life support. What do humans have? Intelligence, Lisa said immediately. Adaptability, Ben added. Stubbornness, Lisa muttered. Jake smiled. Exactly. We don't have natural armor or psychic powers. But we've survived on Earth for millions of years by adapting to everything the planet threw at us. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, floods, droughts, our ancestors lived through all of it. Earth's challenges are nothing compared to Zarian Prime, Lisa argued. Maybe not. But our ancestors didn't have environmental suits or climate control either. They survived with just their wits and their ability to adapt. The next morning, Jake reported to the Trial Preparation Center. It was a simple building near the edge of the city. Elder Zarthul was waiting with several other Kaltari officials. The preparation is the same for all contestants, Zarthul explained. You will receive basic survival equipment and emergency supplies. Nothing more. Jake was given a shelter pod that looked like a silver tent. It could protect him from wind and sand, but it wasn't climate-controlled. He also received 3 days' worth of water in recycling containers and 2 days' worth of food bars that tasted like cardboard. That's it? Jake asked. That is all anyone receives. The trial tests your ability to survive with minimal resources. Jake examined the equipment. It was basic but well made. The shelter pod was light and seemed sturdy. The water containers were efficient. The food would keep him alive but wouldn't taste good. Any advice? Jake asked. Zarthul's scaled face showed something that might have been a smile. In 3,000 years, only 47 beings have passed this trial. Each one found their own way to survive. There is no single correct strategy. That afternoon, Jake watched the other contestants make their final preparations. Vextar was testing his natural armor against sand and wind. The Zentorian warrior seemed completely confident that his physical advantages would carry him through. Kilnara spent her time in meditation. Her glowing eyes closed as she explored possible futures with her psychic abilities. She occasionally nodded or frowned, as if she was seeing things Jake couldn't imagine. Theron was running diagnostics on his mechanical body. The android systems were constantly analyzing environmental data and calculating optimal survival strategies. Numbers and charts appeared on screens built into his arm. Jake felt very ordinary compared to these incredible beings. He had no armor, no psychic powers, and no advanced technology built into his body. He was just a human with basic equipment and whatever skills he had learned in his 42 years of life. Second thoughts? Ben asked, joining him as he watched the preparations. About 1,000 of them, Jake admitted, but I'm still going through with it. Why? Really, why? Jake thought about the question. Because someone needs to show the galaxy that humans are more than just the newest members of the club. We've been playing it safe for 20 years, being polite and careful. Maybe it's time to take a risk. That evening, there was another ceremony. The 4 contestants stood before a crowd of Kaltari citizens and off-world observers. Elder Zarthul spoke about the ancient tradition of the trial and the honor that came with attempting it. Tomorrow at dawn, these 4 brave souls will enter the Great Desert, Zarthul announced. The Crimson Storm season is beginning. For 7 days, they will face the worst that Zarian Prime can offer. May they find the strength to endure. After the ceremony, Vextar approached Jake one last time. Last chance to withdraw, human. No one will think less of you for admitting this is beyond your abilities. Thanks for the concern, Jake said. But I'm good. Your funeral, Vextar said with a shrug of his massive shoulders. Jake spent his last night on Zarian Prime checking and rechecking his equipment. The shelter pod was simple but effective. The water would last 3 days if he was careful. The food would keep him alive but little more. As he lay on his narrow bed, Jake thought about what he was about to attempt. In less than 12 hours, he would be alone in one of the most hostile environments in the galaxy. No backup, no rescue, no second chances. But humans had survived worse with less. His ancestors had walked out of Africa with nothing but stone tools and determination. They had crossed frozen continents and sailed unknown oceans. They had survived plagues and wars and disasters that should have destroyed them. Maybe that was enough. Maybe being human was more of an advantage than anyone realized. The last thing Jake heard before falling asleep was the wind beginning to pick up outside. The storm season was starting. Dawn came too quickly. Jake woke to the sound of wind howling outside his quarters. Through the small window, he could see sand already beginning to swirl in the air. The crimson storm season was starting, and it looked angry. At the launch pad, the 4 contestants gathered with their basic equipment. The transport ships that would take them to random locations in the desert sat waiting. Each ship would drop its passenger at a different spot, ensuring that no one could help the others. Elder Zarthul performed the final ritual, speaking ancient words in the Kaltari language. Jake didn't understand the words, but he could feel the weight of 3,000 years of tradition behind them. "The trial begins now," Zarthul announced. "You will be taken to separate locations in the Great Desert. From that moment, you are alone. Return to this city in 7 days to claim victory. May the desert spirits guide you." Jake climbed into his assigned transport ship. The pilot was a young Kaltari named Veltar, who looked nervous about flying in the approaching storm. "Where are you taking me?" Jake asked. "The Red Canyon region," Veltar replied. "Rocky terrain with some natural shelter. It's considered one of the better starting locations." They flew over the endless desert for about an hour. Jake watched the landscape below change from scattered rocks to rolling sand dunes to jagged canyons. Everything was colored in shades of red and orange like the surface of Mars. "Storm's getting worse," Veltar said, fighting to keep the ship steady in the increasing wind. "We need to drop you soon before it becomes too dangerous to fly." The ship landed in a narrow canyon between two tall rock walls. Jake grabbed his pack and shelter pod and jumped out. Before he could say goodbye, Veltar was already lifting off, racing to get back to the city before the storm hit full force. Jake stood alone in the canyon and looked around. The rock walls rose about 50 feet on both sides, offering some protection from the wind. There were a few cave openings that might provide additional shelter. It could have been worse. The wind was already getting stronger. Sand whipped through the air like tiny bullets, stinging any exposed skin. Jake pulled his protective goggles down and wrapped a cloth around his face. Time to find a good spot to set up camp. He explored the canyon for about an hour before the storm really arrived. When it hit, it was like nothing he had ever experienced. The wind went from strong to violent in minutes. The air became so thick with sand that he couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. Jake found a sheltered spot between two large rocks and quickly set up his shelter pod. The silver material snapped and fluttered in the wind like a flag, but it held together. He crawled inside just as the storm reached full strength. Inside the pod, Jake could barely hear himself think over the roar of wind and sand. The walls of the shelter bent and flexed with each gust, but they didn't break. He checked his supplies. Water for 3 days, food for 2, and whatever he could find or create after that. Then Jake did something that would have surprised the other contestants. He lay down on his sleeping pad, pulled a thin blanket over himself, and went to sleep. Meanwhile, in other parts of the desert, the other contestants were fighting for their lives. Vextar had been dropped in an area of open dunes with no natural shelter. The Zentorian warrior was trying to push through the storm using brute strength. His natural armor protected him from the worst of the sand, but the wind was strong enough to knock him down repeatedly. "Is this the best this planet can do?" Vextar shouted into the storm, though no one could hear him. He forced himself forward step by step, his forearms working to maintain balance in the chaotic wind. But even Zentorian strength had limits. After several hours of fighting the storm, Vextar's energy reserves were draining faster than expected. His armor was holding up, but the constant buffeting was wearing him down. He needed shelter, but there was nothing but open desert in every direction. Kilnara had been dropped near a series of low hills. The telepathic woman had immediately used her psychic abilities to scan for the safest shelter. Her powers had guided her to a deep cave system where she could wait out the worst of the storm. But the storm was causing problems she hadn't foreseen. The electrical energy in the swirling sand was interfering with her telepathic abilities. Every time she tried to read the future or scan her surroundings, she got painful feedback that felt like needles in her brain. "The visions are clouded," she whispered to herself, holding her head in her hands. "I cannot see clearly." For the first time in her life, Kilnara was truly blind to what was coming. Theron had been equipped for this trial better than any organic being could be. The android didn't need to breathe, so the sand-filled air didn't bother him. He didn't need water or food in the traditional sense. His mechanical body should have given him every advantage, but the storm was causing unexpected problems for his systems too. The constant sand was getting into his joints and moving parts, causing friction and wear. The electrical activity in the storm was interfering with his sensors and navigation systems. Error codes multiplying, Theron noted in his mechanical voice. Sand infiltration in primary joints at 15%. Navigation systems operating at 60% efficiency. Power consumption above optimal levels. The android had calculated that his power cells would last 12 days under normal conditions, but fighting the storm was draining energy much faster than expected. If conditions didn't improve, he might run out of power before the 7 days were up. Back in his canyon shelter, Jake slept peacefully. His body seemed to understand instinctively that this was not the time for action. The storm was too powerful to fight, so the best strategy was to conserve energy and wait it out. While he slept, Jake's body did what human bodies had been doing for millions of years. It adapted. His breathing slowed and deepened, conserving oxygen. His heart rate decreased, saving energy. His kidneys began working more efficiently, conserving every drop of water. These weren't conscious decisions. They were automatic responses built into human biology by countless generations of ancestors who had survived droughts, famines, and disasters by simply enduring until conditions improved. At the orbital monitoring station above the planet, Lisa and Ben watched the bio readings from all 4 contestants with growing worry. Bextar's stress indicators are off the charts, Lisa reported. He's burning through his energy reserves fighting the storm. Kilnara appears to be in some kind of distress, Ben added. Her brain activity is erratic, probably psychic feedback from the storm interference. And Theron's power consumption is 30% above his calculated optimal level. At this rate, he'll be in emergency power mode by day 4. Then they looked at Jake's readings. His heart rate was slow and steady. His breathing was deep and regular. His stress hormones were actually lower than they had been before the trial started. Is he unconscious? Ben asked. Did something happen to him? Lisa studied the readings more carefully. No, he's just sleeping. In the middle of the worst sandstorm in decades, Jake Martinez is taking a nap. That can't be right. The biomonitors don't lie. While the other contestants are fighting for survival, our guy is getting 8 hours of sleep. Elder Zarthul appeared beside them at the monitoring station. How do the contestants fare? Lisa showed him the readings. 3 of them are struggling badly, but the human... She pointed to Jake's steady vital signs. Zarthul studied the data with growing surprise. In 3,000 years of trials, he had never seen anything like this. Most contestants spent the first day fighting the storm, using up precious energy and resources. But the human was doing the opposite. Perhaps, Zarthul said slowly, we have underestimated what it means to come from a soft world. The storm raged for 3 more days. During that time, Jake woke only occasionally to drink small sips of water and check his equipment. The rest of the time, he slept. His body remained in the most energy-efficient state possible, while his unconscious mind monitored the situation through sound and vibration. On the 4th day, the wind finally began to calm. The sandstorm was passing, leaving behind a desert transformed by millions of tons of shifted sand. Jake woke naturally as the noise outside decreased. He felt rested and alert, ready for whatever came next. Outside his shelter, the other contestants were in much worse condition. The trial was only half over, but the worst part was supposedly behind them. Now they had to survive 3 more days in the desert heat, with whatever energy and resources they had left. The silence after the storm felt strange to Jake. For 3 days, his world had been filled with howling wind and the constant rattle of sand against his shelter. Now the desert was quiet except for the gentle whisper of settling dust. Jake packed up his shelter pod and looked around the canyon. The storm had changed everything. New sand dunes blocked some passages while others had been swept clean. But his rocky shelter had protected him well, and he still had most of his water and all of his food. He climbed to the top of the canyon wall to get a better view of his surroundings. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, painted in shades of red and gold by the morning sun. Heat waves were already rising from the sand, promising another scorching day. Jake pulled out his simple compass and map. According to his calculations, the city was roughly 60 miles to the northwest. He could try to walk there directly, but that would mean crossing open desert with no shelter. Better to follow the canyon systems where possible, even if it took longer. As he started walking, Jake thought about the other contestants. He wondered how they had survived the storm and where they were now. Bextar was in serious trouble. The Xentorian warrior had spent 3 days fighting the storm instead of sheltering from it. His pride had convinced him that strength alone could overcome any obstacle. But the desert didn't care about pride. Now he was lost. The storm had disoriented him completely, and his natural armor, while protecting him from the sand, was making the heat worse. Centaurians evolved on a cold world with low gravity. The crushing heat and heavy air of Xerion Prime were slowly cooking him inside his own shell. Vextar stumbled across the dunes, his forearms barely keeping him upright. His water supplies were almost gone. He had drunk too much during the storm, not realizing how precious every drop would become. The warrior who had boasted about Centaurian superiority was now learning what desperation felt like. Weak planet, he muttered through cracked lips. Weak trial. Vextar of Centauri does not surrender to mere weather. But the desert wasn't listening to his complaints. The sun climbed higher and the heat grew worse. Vextar's vision began to blur as dehydration took hold. Each step became harder than the last. Kilnara was in a different kind of trouble. The telepathic woman had found good shelter during the storm, but the psychic interference had damaged her more than she realized. Her ability to see possible futures was still clouded and painful to use. Without her psychic advantages, Kilnara was just a physically weak humanoid in a hostile environment. She had enough water for now, but she was lost and confused. Every time she tried to use her abilities to find the right direction, the feedback made her head feel like it was splitting apart. She sat in the shade of a large rock, holding her temples and trying to force her powers to work. "Show me the path," she whispered. "Show me the way home." But the visions that came were fragmented and unclear. She saw herself walking in several different directions, but couldn't tell which ones led to safety and which ones led to death. Theron was facing a crisis of efficiency. The android's logical mind had calculated everything perfectly, but the real desert wasn't matching his computer models. Sand had infiltrated his joints, causing mechanical wear that was draining power faster than expected. His sensor systems were operating at reduced capacity, making navigation difficult. Worse, the extreme temperature swings were affecting his power cells. They didn't hold charge as well in the heat and drained faster in the cold. Current power reserves at 67%, Theron announced to no one. At current consumption rate, critical power levels will be reached in 4.3 days. This is suboptimal. The android was trying different strategies to conserve energy. He moved more slowly to reduce joint friction. He shut down non-essential systems during the hottest parts of the day. But every calculation showed the same result. He might not have enough power to last the full 7 days. Meanwhile, Jake was having a relatively easy time. The canyon systems provided shade and protection from the worst heat. He found a small water seep where moisture collected between rocks, allowing him to refill one of his containers. His human body, designed by evolution to sweat and regulate temperature, was handling the heat better than expected. But Jake's real advantage wasn't physical. It was mental. Where the other contestants were fighting the desert, Jake was working with it. He traveled during the cooler hours of early morning and late afternoon, resting in shade during the brutal midday heat. He didn't waste energy being angry at the conditions or trying to prove his superiority. He simply adapted. On the 5th day, Jake encountered his first real challenge. The canyon system he had been following ended at a cliff face. To continue toward the city, he would have to cross 15 miles of open desert with no shelter. Jake studied the terrain carefully. The direct route would be faster but more dangerous. There was another canyon system about 10 miles to the east, but reaching it would add almost a full day to his journey. With his limited supplies, time was becoming important. He decided to risk the direct route, but he would do it smart. Jake waited until evening when the sun was low. He soaked his clothes with some of his precious water to help with cooling. Then he started walking at a steady, sustainable pace across the open sand. The night desert was cold but manageable. Jake wrapped himself in his thin blanket and kept moving. When the sun rose, he was about halfway across the open stretch. The heat hit him like a hammer, but he had prepared for this. Jake dug a shallow depression in the sand and set up his shelter pod to create shade. He spent the brutal midday hours resting and sipping small amounts of water. As soon as the sun began to drop, he packed up and continued walking. By evening of the 5th day, Jake reached the far side of the open desert. He was tired and had used more water than he wanted to, but he was still in good condition. More importantly, he was now only about 20 miles from the city. The other contestants were not doing as well. Vextar had collapsed during the heat of the day. The proud warrior lay unconscious in the sand, his natural armor now a liability that trapped deadly heat against his body. His water was gone and his body was shutting down from dehydration and heat stroke. In his delirium, Vextar dreamed of his cold homeworld and the ice caves where his people lived. He mumbled apologies to ancestors he had disappointed by failing such a simple trial. Kilnara was still lost and confused. The psychic feedback had gotten worse instead of better, leaving her effectively blind to the future. She wandered in circles, using up water and energy with no clear direction. Fear was beginning to replace her usual calm confidence. "I cannot see," she whispered to the empty desert. "For the first time in my life I am truly blind." Theron was in emergency power mode. The android had shut down all non-essential systems and was moving at minimal speed to conserve energy. His calculations now showed a 40% chance of power failure before reaching the city. This trial was poorly planned, Theron said in his mechanical voice. Organic beings have advantages that were not properly calculated, but Jake was doing more than just surviving. As he settled down for his 5th night in the desert, he realized something that would have surprised the alien observers. He was actually starting to enjoy himself. The desert was harsh but beautiful. The silence was peaceful after years of crowded spaceships and noisy cities. Most importantly, Jake felt a deep connection to something he had never experienced before. This was what his ancestors had faced every day, not just survival, but the simple challenge of being human in a difficult world. He thought about all the generations of humans who had walked across hostile landscapes with nothing but basic tools and determination. They had crossed ice ages and droughts, famines and plagues. They had survived not because they were the strongest or fastest or smartest, but because they could adapt and endure. As Jake fell asleep under the alien stars, he smiled. Tomorrow he would reach the city and complete the trial. But more than that, he had proven something important to himself. Being human wasn't a weakness to overcome. It was a strength that other species had forgotten how to use. The 7th day dawned clear and bright. Jake woke feeling better than he had since the trial began. His water was running low, but he had carefully rationed it and still had enough for the final push to the city. More importantly, he could see the rock formations that marked Kaltari City in the distance. Jake packed his gear one last time and started walking. The morning air was cool and pleasant, and he made good time across the remaining desert. By midday, he could see the city walls clearly. He was going to make it. As he approached the main gate, Jake heard the sound of aircraft engines overhead. Search and rescue ships were launching from the city, heading out into the desert. He realized they were looking for the other contestants who hadn't made it back yet. Elder Zarthul was waiting at the gate with a crowd of Kaltari citizens and off-world observers. When they saw Jake walking calmly toward them, looking tired but healthy, a murmur of surprise went through the crowd. "Commander Martinez," Zarthul said, his scaled face showing amazement. "You have returned. How do you feel?" "Tired, thirsty, but fine," Jake replied. "It was an interesting week." Lisa and Ben pushed through the crowd and grabbed Jake in relieved hugs. "We thought you were dead," Lisa said. "Your bio readings were so low we couldn't tell if you were unconscious or worse." "I was sleeping," Jake said simply. "It seemed like the smart thing to do." Elder Zarthul studied Jake carefully. "In 3,000 years I have never seen a contestant return looking so relaxed. Most who survive the trial crawl back half dead and delirious." "Different approach, I guess," Jake said. The rescue ships were returning and the news wasn't good. Vextar had been found unconscious and severely dehydrated about 30 miles from the city. He was alive but would need intensive medical treatment. The proud warrior who had boasted about Zentorian superiority had been defeated by his own pride and refusal to adapt. Kilnara was discovered wandering in circles, confused and disoriented. The psychic feedback from the storm had damaged her telepathic abilities, leaving her lost both physically and mentally. She kept asking the rescue team where she was and how she had gotten there. Theron was found in complete shutdown mode, his power cells drained to zero. The android's logical mind had calculated everything perfectly, except for the variables that couldn't be measured in advance. His mechanical advantages had become disadvantages in the chaotic environment of the desert. As Jake watched the other contestants being brought back on stretchers and emergency power units, He felt both relief and sadness. These beings were representatives of advanced civilizations with incredible abilities, but they had all been defeated by the same thing: their inability to adapt when their advantages became weaknesses. Elder Zarthul called for silence as the crowd gathered in the main square. 7 days ago, 4 contestants entered the Great Desert during the Crimson Storm season. 3 have been rescued alive but failed to complete the trial. 1 has returned on his own power, having survived the full 7 days in the harshest conditions our world can offer. The Elder turned to Jake. Commander Martinez of Earth, you are the 48th being to pass the Sandstorm trial in 3,000 years of testing, but you are the first to do so with such apparent ease. How did you accomplish this? Jake thought about the question. How could he explain that his success came not from fighting the desert, but from working with it? How could he describe the millions of years of human evolution that had prepared him for exactly this kind of challenge? My species evolved on a world with changing conditions, Jake said finally. Ice ages, droughts, floods, volcanic eruptions. Our ancestors survived them all not by being the strongest or smartest, but by being adaptable. We learned that sometimes the best strategy is not to fight but to endure. You slept through most of the storm, Zarthul noted. This seemed like giving up to us. It wasn't giving up, Jake explained. It was conserving energy for when I actually needed it. Fighting a sandstorm is like fighting gravity. You're going to lose, so why waste the effort? Vextar, now conscious but still weak, was brought into the square on a medical stretcher. The Zentaurian warrior looked at Jake with new understanding in his 4 eyes. I called humans weak, Vextar said in a raspy voice. I was wrong. You are strong in ways I did not understand. Different kinds of strength, Jake replied. Your armor and power are impressive, but this trial wasn't about strength. It was about survival. Kilnara, her psychic abilities slowly returning, approached Jake carefully. I have seen your future, Commander Martinez. Your species will surprise the galaxy in ways no one expects. What do you see? Jake asked. Adaptability, she said simply. Where others see obstacles, humans will see opportunities. Where others fight and fail, humans will adapt and succeed. Theron, his power cells recharged and systems running again, calculated Jake's performance. Your success probability was 11.7% based on physical capabilities. But my calculations did not account for behavioral adaptability. This was an error in my programming. Not an error, Jake said. Just incomplete data. Maybe that's something we can all learn from. Elder Zarthul raised his hands for attention. For 3,000 years, the Sandstorm trial has tested the limits of what beings can endure. It has always been a test of strength, cunning, or advanced technology. Today we have learned that there is another way, the way of adaptation and patience. The Elder turned to address the crowd. Let it be recorded that Jake Martinez of Earth, representing the human species, has not only passed the Sandstorm trial, but has done so in a manner that teaches us all something new about survival. As the ceremony continued, Jake found himself thinking about what this meant for humanity's place in the galaxy. For 20 years, humans had been seen as the newcomers from the easy world, lacking the impressive abilities of other species. But maybe that was exactly their strength. Other species had evolved specialized advantages for specific environments. Centaurians had armor for warfare. Mindari had psychic powers for mental challenges. Nexus androids had mechanical precision for technological problems. But humans had evolved something different, the ability to adapt to anything. Later that evening, there was a feast to celebrate Jake's success. Representatives from dozens of worlds attended, all curious about the human who had passed the impossible trial by taking naps. So what's next for you? Ben asked as they sat together at the celebration. Back to Earth for debriefing, I suppose, Jake said. Then probably another diplomatic mission somewhere. I think it's going to be different now, Lisa said. Word of this will spread throughout the galaxy. Humans won't be seen as the weak newcomers anymore. Jake looked around at the celebration, watching aliens from different worlds talking excitedly about human adaptability and endurance. He thought about all the challenges that lay ahead as humanity expanded into the galaxy. There would be hostile worlds, dangerous situations, and impossible odds. But now Jake knew something he hadn't known a week ago. Humans didn't need natural armor or psychic powers or mechanical perfection. They had something better. Millions of years of evolution that had taught them how to survive anything by adapting to everything. Elder Zarthul approached their table. Commander Martinez, before you leave our world, I have a question. Do you think other humans could pass the Sandstorm trial? Jake thought about it. He pictured his friends back on Earth. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. Could they survive a week in the desert by adapting and enduring instead of fighting? Yes, Jake said with confidence. I think a lot of them could. Not because we're special, but because being human means being adaptable. We might not have the best armor or the strongest bodies or the most advanced technology, but we have something that evolution gave us over millions of years, the ability to make the best of any situation. As the celebration continued into the night, Jake smiled to himself. Humanity's real journey into the galaxy was just beginning, and now everyone would know that humans brought something unique to the cosmic community. Not just intelligence or courage, but the simple, profound ability to adapt and endure. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the greatest strength wasn't in fighting the storm, but in knowing when to sleep through it and wake up ready for whatever came next.